First of all, can we just tell the listeners where we are?
We are at Pearl Studios.
Guys, Jillian and I are Broadway people. We, as you know, we do a bunch of Broadway things. So we're at, a lot of you don't have any idea what this is, but Pearl Studios is a place where actors come to audition.
We are surrounded by the prettiest, skinniest people.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hi, Jillian Pensavalle.
Hey, Patrick Hines.
Oh, wow. Tone.
I know.
How are you?
Well, as Pete Campbell would say, not great, Bob. We're talking about The Keepers, and it's tough.
It is tough.
It's hard.
It's tough. One of the things I will say is that this documentary is incredibly well made.
Yes.
Also,
all across the board.
And not to sound like a crap. Like, I'm a homosexual, so I notice these things.
Really?
I'm into guys, Jillian.
Oh my God.
This is not a date. These older women have all been through hell, all of them. They all look incredible.
They are...
Why are they better looking than all of my, 28-year-old friends?
Because they are the strongest people on the planet.
Yes.
And they're just like, I'm going to live my life. I don't care. I'm just going to be the strongest, most inspiring person. And
It's true.
think it just radiate. They just radiate
Yeah.
pure goodness. They're amazing. I love all of them.
Baltimore has always been a quintessentially Catholic city.
The priests were the authority. Whatever they told you to do, you did.
The city has its level of corruption. Sister Cathy exemplified this spirit of compassion and kindness.
I have never had a teacher like that before.
She was murdered our senior year, and it's always haunted many people in the community.
Our mission, we were driven to find out who hurt Sister Cathy.
People pop up from 45, 50 years ago who say, I have a story I'd like to tell you.
I believe Cathy Ceznick was killed because she was going to talk about what went on at Keogh.
There's an on-the-record public story of what happened to Sister Cathy, and then there's the world beneath.
What is The Keepers about?
The Keepers is about who killed Sister Cathy. Sister Cathy Ceznick was a nun in Baltimore. She was murdered. What was she covering up? What did she know? What
You're
did
in
the people
such
around
a
her
bad
know?
mood about it. I've never seen you like this.
There's a lot of horrifying things in this, especially when we get to the next episode. But overall,
Yeah.
every episode I ended on a note of feeling inspired and empowered because of these women.
And to be fair, it's not like I'm like, ooh, pop the popcorn.
Yeah.
Like this,
Oh, I stress ate the shit out of everything in my house when I was watching this.
The Gilmore Girls, this is not.
No.
So, okay, this is the first of 2 episodes about The Keepers, and this episode's going to cover episodes 1 through 3. The second episode covers episodes 4 through 7, in case you couldn't follow. And you can get that episode right now as well. So they're both available now. So we are just going to basically go through this like an episode at a time. So in episode 1, we first want to just sort of talk about the characters we meet. Who is the very first person we meet in this documentary?
Tom Nugent. Definite journalist, possible hoarder.
Yes.
In his attic filled with his 30-year career is just in boxes in this attic.
I've spent the last 30 years as a freelance writer going wherever I could to do my job and make a living.
He seems very much involved in the telling of the story.
Yeah, we always come back to him.
Yeah.
Because he did so much research on it. He spoke to so many people.
Yeah.
Damn it, where the hell did I put it? Basically, this story, Who Killed Sister Cathy? It's a 6,000-word monster review of the whole thing.
And then we meet the other players. So there are these 2 incredible, oh my God, I love them. These incredible women, Gemma and Abbie, each one wonkier and more up at 2 a.m, working in the Facebook group than the next.
Yeah.
Can you please tell the people my favorite thing about Gemma?
I get y'all started with something to drink.
That she drinks Yellowtail white wine exclusively.
What
What kind of Chardonnay do you have?
I have Yellowtail.
Oh, that's fine. That's what I drink at home. Only.
And she is no nonsense. Tom Nugent describes them as Abbie is the intellectual and Gemma is the bulldog.
I have to say that Gemma has some of the best takes to the camera that I've ever seen. Like, sometimes she'll be like cornering a policeman, and then like she will literally turn to the camera and roll her eyes.
Be like, can you believe this shit? Can you believe what I have to deal with to get to the bottom of my favorite teacher's murder? Like, look at these idiots. Gemma has no time. You know what I also love about these women? None of them have any time for your shit. Don't even try it. Don't even try it. They have no time.
Actually, you know who does have time is Abbie. Because Abbie will literally be like, y'all, I know you said this box wasn't there, but I bet it is.
But could you look for me, please?
I'd asked once in the past. Sometimes I find if I ask twice, they find them.
So you have to dig a little deeper in.
But this is an old open warrant.
Gemma and Abbie are amazing. They are the people that are like behind the investigation. Like, they're on top of it.
They have more information than law enforcement.
They literally
at this
do.
point.
Yeah.
And don't worry, Gemma's not hitting on you, okay? Don't worry about it.
This is my email address, because you're not on Facebook, but you probably have email, right?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so I'm not hitting on you, okay? I seriously am not.
She's going to give you her email address, but she's definitely not hitting on you.
She's got much more important things to talk to you about. Gemma and Abbie were Sister Cathy's students. Sister Cathy was the cool young nun reading the Scarlet Letter.
Reading really edgy books like the Scarlet Letter.
But they loved her.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're 13 years old and you're going to an all-girls school, like, you're probably not excited to go to school.
It's true.
But she made them really excited.
I guess because she was so close in age to us, everything she said was romantic. You know, English literature, how you can express yourself through poems. When you're an adolescent and you're a girl, that resonates with you. And she was able to touch a lot of people in a short amount of time.
They're not just these women who are like, this is an interesting case.
Right.
This is really personal for them because they loved this teacher. And she was just loved by everyone at the school.
Right.
Sister Cat, she was like the cool party nun, which sounds crazy, but...
So in the first episode, we sort of find out we find out about her murder. And then for the subsequent like 6 episodes, we get the entire backstory of like all the shenanigans involved in it.
Right.
But so let's take the people through the murder.
Let's do it.
Okay. So Cathy was a nun, and she lived with the rest of the nuns in like the nun house. But then her and another nun named Sister Russell moved out of the nun house to live like in an actual apartment and teach at a public school.
That was an experiment that
Yeah.
they were going to be nuns, but like go out into the real world and
Yeah.
teach at a public school and see how that worked.
Exactly.
So they live at Carriage Apartments.
What are the events that take place?
Okay, so on November 7th, 1969, Sister Cathy runs some errands after work. She told several people that she was getting an engagement present, and she was really excited about it.
She went from her apartment to the Edmondson Village Shopping Center.
Sister Cathy went to the local bank, cashed her paycheck, bought some dinner rolls.
Essentially, that's all we know for sure.
Several witnesses have told the newspaper and the police there's no doubt that the nun returns to her parking space, but no one has proved that she ever came back to her apartment. Instead, she vanished.
So basically, essentially, like, she just doesn't come home, and it gets to be 11 o'clock, and her roommate, Sister Russell, and Russell is her first name,
Yes.
doesn't call the cops. Instead, she calls
Jerry Koob.
who was a fox.
Yes.
He was a fox back in the day.
Father Koob and Cathy had met. Cathy was teaching English and Father Jerry Koob was teaching religion. They apparently developed a friendship.
So it's kind of noted. Abbie says a little bit later, like,
That troubles us a bit looking back. Why didn't Sister Russell call the police?
I thought it was weird. We think it's weird now that she didn't call the police right away. Instead, she called this priest.
And then Brother Pete McEwen, who were where?
They had gone to see Easy Rider.
Yeah. So, like, is that? Can you get more November 7th, 1969? I mean,
Totally. So he comes over, and they eventually call the cops. They call the cops at 1 a.m. Now, she's been gone for hours and hours and hours. She's a nun, guys. She should be home by now.
she's the cool nun, but she's not, like, out on the town.
She's cool, but she's not that cool. So they call the cops at 1 a.m. One cop comes over and like sort of like takes the report, and then what do?
They have a mass.
They have a mass.
They have a little mass.
We did a little bread and wine, and I did the mass, the consecration.
I guess that, like, in a gesture of good faith, they leave a spot for Cathy, like, thinking that she's going to saunter in at 2:00 and be like, you guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, slurring her words because she just had one hell of a time out at the Baltimore bars. Spoiler alert, that is unfortunately not the case.
I'm...
And you thought we weren't going to have fun today.
What if that's how the movie ended?
I would be a much happier person,
Yeah,
and
it's true.
so would
I know.
many other people, let me tell you.
Oh, my God. So then this gets creepy. So then Coob and his friend, the guy that he went to see the movie with, go for a walk.
And then it was like, and then we spot the car. So Sister Cathy's car is close to her apartment, but parked almost backwards. Like,
with its rear end sticking out in the street, right adjacent to the carriage house apartments where the nun lived. Whoever put that car there wanted it to be found.
Yeah.
the keys are there. It's unlocked. There's mud everywhere.
There's a twig in the ignition.
What Jerry calls the famous twig.
Right.
It's like the bloody glove. It's like the bloody
Right,
glove of
totally.
of Sister Cathy's case. Which,
Yeah.
But it's a very unsettling, because they have a picture of, they have the old police photo of the car, and it's like, that just shouldn't be. It's like,
And
so
also,
out of
like, they were
place.
in the apartment when whoever left the car there.
Exactly.
Like, and they don't even mention that in the documentary, but like they easily could have seen who brought the car there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's very scary and unsettling.
One other thing that we need to mention, Mary Spence makes an appearance in episode 1.
Her and her Baltimore accent.
I was a sophomore in high school. It was a Friday night, and my girlfriend and I said, let's look in the phone book and find out where all our teachers live.
Tell the people what happened.
Okay, so she, like you do when you're that age, she had a crush on a teacher.
Mr. Noon.
Hashtag hot priest.
Hashtag hot priest. Her and her friend, they were just like giggling little.
They're like, the phone book came out today.
Phone book. And so they go through, look up their teachers, where the teachers live. Then they like decide to go. They don't just look at it and they're just like, oh my God, I know where that street is.
Yeah.
No, they go to the street.
It's called stalking. I mean, we literally call that stalking.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they go and they're like looking at Mr. Noon.
What
and
did they
has,
say?
He has his undershirt on.
He's got his undershirt on.
And they are just tickled. They are having the greatest time. And then their fun comes to a screeching halt when they just hear like angry, violent screaming.
Before we knew it, we heard this yelling, and I would say it came from that direction. That's where Sister Cathy and Sister Russell lived.
Do they investigate?
No, they run the hell home.
Exactly.
Wouldn't you?
Yes.
You're out. You're doing something you shouldn't be doing.
It's true.
You're staring into your teacher's bedroom window, and who's like looking at himself in the mirror in his undershirt.
And now, granted, if I look like Mr. Noon, I'd be looking at myself in a t-shirt a lot.
Of course.
Yeah.
But little Mary and her girlfriend should not have been there anyway, so they just get the hell out of Dodge. What's interesting, though, is that we don't hear about any yelling from Jerry Coob.
From anybody else.
Yeah. Mary Spence is the only person who mentions this yelling.
So that's just kind of it. Kathy's just kind of gone. The next big thing that happens is 4 days later, like another white girl goes missing.
Joyce Malecki is a young woman who was abducted 3 or 4 days after Sister Cathy was abducted.
Joyce Malecki. She's 20 years old. She's young, pretty, also went out shopping.
Yeah.
Her car was also left all muddy. There are some similarities here, but the cops are like, I don't really think there's a connection. It's like,
right, totally.
Even Gemma and or Abbie were just like.
Back then, abductions and murders of random young women were almost unheard of. For 2 young women to be abducted within 4 days of each other, what are the odds?
The best part about this is that, like, all these years later, Gemma and Abbie are like, well, we're working on Sister Cathy. Let's take the case.
So we said, as long as we're spending this time looking around, let's see if we can find any information to help the Maleckis.
They are angels on earth.
Yeah.
How lovely are they that it's like, no, we'll totally take on your pain and hurt, and we'll help you too.
Totally.
No problem.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, but the thing is, Joyce Malecki's body is found really quickly. Like, within 4 days.
Yeah,
they find her body.
Yeah, and Sister Cathy's wouldn't be found until, she goes missing November 7th. She's not found until January 3rd, 1970.
Kathy.
Sister Cathy,
right.
Yeah. But they were both discovered in off the beaten path, very secluded areas. Hunters discovered both of their bodies because it's like they're in the middle of the woods.
Let's talk about the law enforcement that we meet in this episode. So first is John Barnold. Is that how you say his name?
Yeah, he was the former chief of homicide of the Baltimore City Police Department.
Youngest he was 38 years old. He was the youngest.
Good for him.
Yeah.
He was super busy. He had a lot of other things to do.
I don't want to seem invasive, but as I said, I was supervising robberies, homicides. We were averaging 200 homicides a year even then in Baltimore City. So with 200 homicides, numerous assaults, sex offenses, I couldn't really devote my time to one specific case.
I mean, we come to find out that, like, the police is completely under the thumb of, like, the bad guys here. But
Right.
at the same time, they do have 200 homicides a year. How do you possibly investigate every one?
Yeah, as the chief of police or the chief of homicide, he was just like, I just let everyone else do the work. That's kind of his job,
Yeah,
is to
to oversee.
it. But he should have done
More.
more.
Well, the one guy who did do more was...
James Skinnell.
James Skinnell is a retired Baltimore County policeman, okay? Wonderful reputation, was involved at the time that Sister Cathy's body was discovered in Lansdowne, took the call from the hunters who reported it, and went out. He was the first officer on the scene.
James Skinnell, who is such a mumbly speaker that he needed subtitles. I know you watch with subtitles, so you might not have noticed.
I didn't notice that.
He is subtitled because you can't understand what he's saying.
That is excellent.
He's as drunk as I'd like to be midday. Gemma and Abbie are skeptical of James Skinnell.
And Gemma, here's why Gemma is so genius, I think. We know immediately. She's like,
I have a lot of doubts about Skinnell, but he doesn't need to know that.
and the way, like, we know that, which is awesome, because now I'm like, I hate this guy too. If Gemma says we have an issue with him, then you better believe we have an issue. But she just, like, knows how to talk to everybody.
She
like,
does.
She doesn't let on that she thinks that he could have done more, or, like, there's something about him, but he doesn't know that.
Right.
Like, she's so good at talking to people and getting information. I'll buy you a crab cake if you just make the freaking phone call. And he's like, I can. And she's like, you could.
So, like, what happens is he takes them to the site where the body was discovered.
Right.
Right?
And he offers up weird information.
What does he say? I don't remember.
He was like, there was no deterioration. There was no maggots or anything. So, like, don't worry about that. There were no maggots, okay? Is it on the record? There's no
right.
maggots. And it's like, well, we'll get back to that, won't we?
Let's put a pin in that.
Skinnell.
So then when they go to,
That's
like...
your real name. Now I just hate him.
When they go to drop off Skinnell at the end of his, like, interview, Gemma's like, I'm gonna go say bye.
When we were at your house, you told me some information, and I wanted to ask you about it again. You said it might be possible to get the report from the patrol officer, and who would we call to do that besides you?
Probably have to call headquarters.
Do you know anybody that do you have any friends now that are still in the police department?
Most of mine retired, dead.
You wouldn't want to make that call for me if I treat you to a crab cake, would you?
I don't think they know me.
She's like, yeah, but you were pretty big time back in the day. Can't you just call and, like, pull some strings? And he's like,
Why does she
no.
think that they'll remember him?
Why?
Because he looks like Paul Newman.
Oh, he looked like Paul Newman. That's why they would.
She's laying it on so thick.
The blue eyes and the beard. Yeah.
Does he even comprehend that
I
he's
don't
in the
think
middle of
so.
a conversation? I don't.
But then she literally does a take to the camera. She's like, okay, thanks, bye. Turns to the
Can
camera.
you believe this shit? And I'm like, Gemma, no. Pass the wine, girl. I need it. Bad. This is episode 1, and I'm like, what am I watching?
I know.
And then we're introduced to Jane Doe, who now the chills are happening. She is a student who said she was taken to Cathy's dead body.
Yeah.
So we are introduced to this woman as Jane Doe,
right?
Who says that 45 years ago she was taken to Sister Cathy's dead body, and she came out in 1992.
But since then, she's been like Jane Doe. Like nobody knew who she was, and so like this is like what episode 2 of the documentary is going to be, is like revealing Jane Doe.
Right.
Yeah.
Jane Doe probably knows exactly what happened, and it has taken her 45 years to gradually confront the full horror in herself. Who is Jane Doe?
Episode 2 is off and running because it picks up with us like in the kitchen of Jane Doe.
Yeah.
And Tom Nugent is back. You hear his voice, and he's interviewing her. And you keep getting like a little bit of her face or like whatever, but then there's like a reveal, and you see her.
Episode 2 was easily one of the hardest things I've ever watched in my life.
Yeah.
It's so vile that I kind of can't believe Netflix didn't even say, like, hey, P.S., I know you're watching a true crime documentary about a dead nun. It's bad enough. But this is going to be a little tough.
Yeah, we're not going to get into it here, but like the extent of the sexual abuse is like really, really fully explored in this episode.
And it makes you love Jean so much more.
Jean is Jane Doe.
Yes.
Yeah. So we meet Jane Doe. Her name is Jean, and she starts telling her story.
She's a superhero.
Yeah.
She's a straight up superhero of a woman.
Being Jane Doe, for me, that was paramount. I didn't want anyone to know who I was. I didn't want anybody to know my family. For quite some time, I trusted that I had some privacy with that because I was always afraid what people were going to say and think about what I had said.
We'll get back to her in a minute, but like the next thing that happens is that we learn about Baltimore.
Did you hear that it was really religious and people went to church a lot?
Every neighborhood had its own parish. Everybody went to church. I mean, rosary, May processions were a big thing. First communions, all the sacraments were a really big deal. You were not only going to school with people that were Catholic, going to church with people that were Catholic, you were living in Catholic communities.
So Baltimore's super churchy, guys. What did your husband say to you?
He was like, we get it. They go to church. Let's keep going. Because it was like 15 different people of like, so we went to church a lot.
Yeah.
And so
but
we
I think
went
the
to
point
church.
is to drive home that like priests are gods in Baltimore, especially in the late 60s.
Absolutely.
If you were a kid and you had a problem with a priest, it wasn't going to go your way. Like the priests were the most revered people in Baltimore.
They were an extension of God. I mean, really.
Like religion was the cornerstone of existence at Baltimore.
Absolutely.
And so that's driven home by the fact that the school, what was the school called?
Bishop Keogh.
Talk about Bishop Keogh.
Bishop Keogh was the place to be. It was a big deal when you got in. You worked hard.
It was really a big deal to be accepted to go to Archbishop Keogh. You had to get in. You had to take an entrance exam. So the big day in 8th grade would be when you came home for lunch and your letter was waiting for you that you had been admitted to Keogh.
And in talking about the school, we also learned about the nuns. What are they, like the Sisters of Notre Dame? Who were the nuns who would be the teachers at the school, right?
Yeah.
You know, we learn a lot about Cathy in this moment, right? Just like the things that people said about her when she was, you know, they taught the nuns, although I love how they're all former nuns, like all of them. It's like former nun, former nun,
it was like
nun.
then priest, then brother, where people were like, dude,
I'm out of here.
Out.
But they talk about like Cathy. Somebody described her. She was like a rosebud that gradually opened. You know, like she was super rulesy, like by the book, did everything right, but like was still like earthy and cool, and people loved her.
Yeah. How creepy, but like when we heard her voice.
Oh my goodness! So there's a moment like towards the end of the episode where we hear Cathy's voice. She's reading a poem that she wrote for Jerry.
Yeah.
What's his last name?
Jerry Koob.
Koob. And you hear her voice reading a poem, and she is articulating for Jesus.
Right?
Yeah. Her diction was on point.
And to hear, of course, it's always like we talked about this with Kurt and Courtney, but when you hear that person's voice, you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Bubbles touch. And true, they break. But some are coupled in a rainbowed joining, and float, and are, and burst together. It is dedicated to Jerry.
Okay.
So now we're back to Jean.
Yeah. Jean, who's one of the students.
Right. And Jane Doe. And she's really
They're the same person, yeah.
Yeah, who's blowing this wide open, really. It's because of her that we are learning about this tragic story. So her story is that she was sexually abused by her uncle.
Right.
When she was younger. She, again, it was a very churchy time. She decides to go to confession about this. She's feeling a lot of guilt, which
survivors of sexual abuse. Yeah, of course.
And we meet Father Magnus, who has one thing going for him is that he looks like Don Draper. But otherwise, he's a piece of shit. So she goes to confession, which, again, I don't know everyone's religious background. It's meant to be. That's the point. The point of confession is that it's anonymous.
Right.
Like, you're supposed to be able to go and say whatever you want and feel safe.
Yeah.
He's like, hey, can I see your face and know your name? Just breaking the, like, right out the gate, just not giving a shit for anything the way things are supposed to go.
Right. So and it's super... Oh, God, again, I approach everything from having a young daughter and, like, the predatoriness of it all. Like, it's so disgusting.
So he immediately wants to make her feel vulnerable and exposed. Can I know your name and see your face?
Yeah.
And then he's like, I'm going to have to think on this and not sure if God can forgive you for suffering through something that is absolutely not your fault. Let me think this over with supreme piece of shit, Father Joe Maskell.
Meanwhile, poor Jean's like, okay.
Right. Joe Maskell looks like one of the many sketches of the Zodiac Killer, which is totally appropriate.
Have we ever seen the two of them in the same room together?
Maybe he's the Zodiac.
I'm just saying.
They are all powerful. And he's an actual monster, so you never know, you guys.
Oh, did we just solve the Zodiac case?
I think we did.
We didn't even mean to.
Oh my God.
Yeah, sorry, continue. You're on a roll.
So it's like, all right, let's see if God can forgive you. I have to think about it. So he introduces her to what she describes, or they described, as therapy sessions, which is like sexual abuse and torture and things that were like extremely hard to watch and hear about.
Yeah.
And
which I gotta say, Jean describes in incredibly stoic and graphic detail.
So these therapy sessions, which were just sexual abuse, I mean, he would call her on the loudspeaker. Like, this is how insane it was. He would say, like, Jean to Father Maskell's office, and then, like, she describes hearing the door click behind her.
Yeah.
And then she would just disassociate. And sometimes there were other people there, like the mysterious but violent brother Bob.
Yeah.
And sometimes there were police officers in the room. And it was, but the psychological mind F of it all is that she would see, he became a protector of sorts. Like, he would stand guard by the door while these other men were in the room. And she actually, for a moment, saw him as her protector.
Right.
He preyed on this woman who had been abused. And that's what he would do. He would go through people's records and find weaknesses and write up all these weird files. He was like obsessed with keeping files on people.
I mean, he's just clearly out of his mind, just like a monster person. But we also come to find out
Joseph Maskell also was the chaplain for the police department, for the Air National Guard, for Maryland State Police.
Maskell was covered because his brother Tommy was a respected Baltimore City policeman. And just over the city-county line, he was chaplain for the Baltimore County Police, and he was close friends with several of the police.
He was basically part of the police force.
Exactly.
I mean, there were police officers in the room abusing these girls as well. Like, they were all working together on this.
Meanwhile, Jean's dad is a police officer, and like that heartbreaking moment where she's like,
if you can imagine having to do something to a policeman, your father is a policeman.
Just horrifying.
So in addition to all of the physical horror that Jean was subjected to, she was called a whore all the time and whatever. Ugh. Just awful. But Father Maskell also had a gun.
Oh my God, the gun.
And at one point, he takes the bullets out and puts the gun to Jean's head and is like, if your father ever found out like that you're such a whore, he would do the same thing, but there would be bullets in the gun.
Right.
The gun comes back because we meet Brian Schwab.
Now, I have to ask you a question about Brian Schwab.
Yeah.
Did you notice what he had up in his in the den when he was giving his interview?
What his wife calls his dust collecting room? And I was like, that's so mean. Unless, are you a piece of garbage? I don't know. Right. If you're a piece of shit, then good on your wife for not letting you celebrate anything. But that's how I look at these documentaries. Like, are you a monster?
I know.
When I first meet this person, I don't know.
He has a signed lithograph of Batman and Robin signed by Adam West.
Okay, well, that's amazing. Again, does it get more 1969 than that? I don't think it does.
I don't know how it was like literally the first thing I noticed in that shot. I was like, is that? And then like I paused it, and if you look at it, like you could clearly say it says Adam West.
That is perfect. In his trophy room with all of these awards from being a cop.
But he's essentially here just to tell us, he's like, I used to be an altar boy, and one day Father Maskell came in and like put his gun on the table.
One day we were getting ready for mass. You know, the altar boys, we'd get there a little early. He come in to the sacristy and he takes a handgun out of his pocket, put it on the counter in the sacristy.
But then he asked him, so Brian was like, hey, Father, real quick, why is there a gun next to like the communion and the wine? Like, is this like a new thing? And he said Father Maskell like looked right through him.
Yeah.
And he said, I've never seen, the next time he saw a look that evil was when he was a cop dealing with actual serial killers.
Right.
I didn't get a look like that until years later, interviewing violent offenders, talking to someone who had murdered somebody, looking in their eyes. That's when I got that look again.
And I'm like, oh, great. He really is the Zodiac Killer. Amazing.
All right, so what does Maskell have to... How does Cathy tie into all of this?
It's clear that Cathy knew what was going on. What's not clear is the extent of what she knew.
Right.
Jean and Sister Cathy have a conversation, and Sister Cathy says, how are you liking Bishop
Right.
Keogh? And Jean's like, not great, Bob. I'm really not having a good time.
Yeah.
And Sister Cathy tries to get it out of her, and Jean is, of course, apprehensive. Like, who knows? Like, think about being a teenager and, like, what room you just left. And so Cathy's like, okay, how about I ask you questions, and you nod your head.
Good on
and,
you,
like,
Cathy.
give me a wink or something.
Yep, good on you.
Which means that Cathy definitely knew a lot more.
Whoa,
than
what's the
just
first
a
question she
little.
asked her?
She's like, are you being abused by anybody in the school? And Jean's like, yup. And then Sister Cathy, in all of her amazingness, just says, don't worry about it, girl. I got you. I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to take care of it.
However, what does Cathy then go and do? She's like, oh, by the way, can I go live somewhere else and work at a different school?
I know.
So you've seen the rest of the documentary. I haven't.
Mm-hmm.
I need that to be addressed. I need to understand why she's like, girls, come here. I know that you're all being horribly sexually violated. I'm going to totally fix this. Meanwhile, like, she's having lunch with like Mother Superior being like, any chance I could go work at the public school?
Right.
You know?
I don't know. And unfortunately, because this happened so long ago, so many of these people are dead.
Yeah.
And not just murdered by priests, but some
Right.
of them are just, they died. They were old then.
Right.
So we're not privy to a lot of these conversations or information.
Right. Well, so another important piece of information that we find out, or like, you know, our heroes Gemma and Abbie find out that like the night before Cathy was murdered, another student came to her apartment with her boyfriend, and
She was sharing with Cathy about the abuse, and Joseph Maskell and Father Neil Magnus came into the apartment without knocking. I asked her specifically what expressions were on their faces, and she said Maskell was furious, Magnus looked dumb.
And then, of course, the next day, the student is brought into Maskell's office, threatened,
right,
into silence, scared, just the shit
and
scared out of her.
Gemma says, or Abbie says, one of them says that like this woman who has chosen to remain anonymous all of these years has lived with fear her entire life.
Of course.
Yeah. So then the next day, Sister Cathy disappears.
Right.
At some point soon thereafter, Jane Doe gets called into Maskell's office.
Right.
I was called to the room. It was after school, and he was frantic.
He's like, did you hear that Sister Cathy disappeared? I had nothing to do with it, but do you want to see the dead body?
Right.
He said, I know you're really close with Sister Cathy, and I just, I wanted to let you know that she's missing. And he said, but I know where she is. And I was like, what do you mean? You know where she is? He said, yeah, I know where she is. Do you want me to take you to her? And I was like, yes.
And then he takes her.
There was grass and dirt, and I'm thinking, what is she doing here? And I'm following him. And he moved over. And there's a clump on the ground, and I knew it was her.
And here's what's important. Remember, Skinnell was like, just want to say there were no maggots or anything.
Yeah,
Can I
exactly.
say that?
Mm-hmm.
Guess what?
Before I knew it, I was kneeling down next to her, and there were maggots in her face. And I was wiping her face and just saying, please help me, please help me, please help me, please help me.
The episode ends with Jean telling us what Maskell said to her.
And he came down real close, and he said, do you see what happens when you say bad things about people?
There are some other things, though, that we definitely need to talk about in this episode.
Oh, yes, please.
Netflix, Ryan White, the director, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for the Nuns Having Fun calendar.
These are calendars called Nuns Having Fun, and they're absolutely fabulous.
I love that we live in a world where it exists. Thank you for throwing this in. And what is her name?
Lynn Smith. Thank you for giving us Lynn Smith, because she takes us through the Nuns Having Fun calendar. What's the first one we see?
This is called Sisters on the Dock of the Bay, instead of sitting on the dock of the bay. Sisters on the dock of the bay. Oh.
Get it? Like, she thinks that we're not going to get these puns, and she just wants to talk about the puns.
This is called Mass Transit.
Mass transit. Get it?
Get it?
And the other one was
they're like on a roller coaster, and like the roller coaster's going down, and Lynn like just cuts, like all of the nuns have their mouths open except for one or something, and then like Lynn turns to the camera and says,
I'd yell too, but I took a vow of silence.
But we also meet another thing, again, like I was saying, like it's such a roller coaster of emotions because I feel so empowered and inspired by these women. So we meet other survivors, I'm going to say. And they are awesome.
They're all amazing.
And they all have the same story. And again, they're all articulate. They've dealt with this in their own way for 45 years. They've found whatever piece they need to find. And now they're like, guess what? We're not going to stay quiet.
Yeah.
We're going to get to the bottom of this.
And we'll find out how when we talk about episode 3.
Before we get into episode 3, I just want to mention, because this comes back. I know you haven't watched the end of it. Jerry Koob and Sister Cathy almost ran away together.
And meanwhile, they would have been the hottest couple.
I know.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Do you see the pictures of him back in the day?
I get it. I saw the pictures.
Forget the Nuns Having Fun calendar. I want like the hot priest calendar.
Only if you're not pieces of garbage.
And Koob, as far as we know right now, is not a piece of garbage.
Yeah, and it comes back. We'll get to it in part 2.
Okay. So episode 3 opens with Jean, who's our Jane Doe. Mm-hmm. We're like in her house, and we're learning, and this is something that like Jillian is going to talk a little bit more about, but like we're learning that like she has no memory. Mm-hmm. Remember the whole image of like the door slamming and like she would disassociate?
Hearing that click.
Yep, that really comes into play here.
I'm going to use the word dissociating, as if I had separated out from it. The guilt, the fear. It was like I'd hear the click of the door. Everything would stop.
What happens is she's looking to buy a house.
And the real estate agent happened to be a classmate from Keogh.
And the real estate broker is like, do you go to the reunions? And she's like, no, I never go.
And I felt like I was dancing to get as far away from that topic as possible. And I didn't understand any of that. I just knew it was uncomfortable. I knew I didn't like Keogh. I knew I never went to any of the reunions. And she made me look at it.
This woman, Jean, is just amazing.
Yeah.
And she's like, I'm going to look inside myself and I'm going to get a yearbook and go through, like, why don't I go to the reunions?
Right.
I decided that Lent I would do what I did best, which was take it into prayer, settle down, and just be still and work with it on a prayerful level. So I quieted down and I let myself just kind of be. And with that came memories.
And then it all starts to come back to her.
Yeah, she like sees Maskell and or possibly the Zodiac Killer's photo and it just all comes flooding back.
I saw Magnus's face. And when I saw Maskell's face next to him, all I felt was, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit.
So she goes to the archdiocese, and honestly, they say to her, the one of their attorneys, Father Rick Woy, says,
he said, I was the first to voice a complaint like this about Joseph Maskell, but that he believed me. He was so personable and told me that Maskell was very intelligent and that if they didn't have everything in place, he would slip right through their fingers.
We believe you, but we need to like have it in writing and blah. So she's writing statements and she reads one of the statements to the documentarians. She's just like rereading her own words.
So this is one of the memories that I read to the archdiocesan representatives. Father Maskell had me come to the office one day when I had free mods.
if you haven't seen the documentary, we cannot drive home enough. She is a rock, but not in a detached way. Like, she's just a very strong woman. And she's reading this statement, and it's the only time in the movie that this happens, where she reads this like really graphic thing, and then she just looks at the documentarian for like 5 seconds, and then like boom, puts her head on the table and starts sobbing.
He walked me to the door. He said very soft and slow, "I know you hated that. I'm glad." He gave me his blessing, and I left.
I think it's what it also represented to her. Like, here's the statement I had to read that went nowhere.
Right, yeah.
Because, it's just like...
Right, because of course, ultimately, like, the archdiocese just like turns on her. And like, they say to her, he's so smart that if we don't do this exactly right, he's going to slip through our fingers. And so they're saying to her, like, the thing that we need that can prove this and we can remove him is corroborating evidence. And she says, like, I'm living through hell remembering this stuff. I'm not going to ask another person to do this.
Right.
And so that's when it all starts to fall apart.
Right.
With the archdiocese.
But what's also something that's just like undeniable, he was taking these girls to the gynecologist.
That's crazy.
Which is insane. Like,
but this is what I was talking about in the beginning, where he's telling the parents, like, I need to take your daughter to the gynecologist, and the father's like, okay.
And it's
also like prescribing them like medication for schizophrenics.
Yeah.
Like, he goes to the parents, he's like, I think your daughter's schizophrenic.
Yeah,
so don't
I
believe
think
anything
she's
she says.
Crazy.
Yeah.
It's like, no, she's not making this up. So that if she does come forward, it's like, oh, honey.
Right.
It's just one of the
I mean,
voices
he's
in
a
your head.
monster. Like, you can't drive home enough how he's a monster.
But it's also just like a different time.
Yeah.
Like, that would never, ever, even like 10 years after that.
Right.
For a priest to be in the room with your 14-year-old with this gynecologist, and then God knows what, whatever else happens in that room. But for him to be like, I'm going to take you to a gynecologist and then sit in on the appointment, like, that's
Right.
insane.
Exactly.
Like, parents, like, priests had that much power.
Right.
And were that powerful that the parents were like, well, if Father Maskell says it, it's like, this is insane.
Right. So anyway, so the other thing that had happened is that the archdiocese had like was paying for Jean's family's lawyer, and ultimately, like, the dad, like the badass husband, calls and like fires that guy and is like, this is not going in the right direction. And who do they hire?
Ms.
Beverly Wallace.
She doesn't have time for your shit. Don't even try it. She has got no time.
She had an incident when she was a kid that made her have certain feelings about the Catholic religion.
Right.
I grew up in a very small town in Kentucky. And when I was little, my two best friends came home and said, Sister Mary, whatever, says we can't play with you anymore because you're a heathen, you're not Catholic. And I didn't even know what heathen meant. So to me, my view of the Catholic Church was just, they're another church. And I didn't see the Archdiocese as this, monumental institution.
I just love the way she says, Sister Mary, whatever.
Whatever.
And I also love the way that she says, they're another church.
Yeah. She's like, she is eye rolling, but taking it so seriously. But she's like, you guys, right?
So this is the point where like Beverly Wallace does decide needs to happen is they need to find other people that this has happened to.
Right.
So Jean's amazing her like 85 brothers and 22 sisters.
I know.
They
and
all
of
like
their kids.
And all of their kids.
All hands on deck here.
Oh
for Jean.
God, they're all like in the cutest house too. That house is so cute.
Yeah, they like get a gigantic table.
Right.
And they all sit there and they write handwritten postcards.
But wait, how did they get... So they had to find people from the school who had been there and get them to come forward.
Right.
How did they do it?
They like trick a nun into giving them the entire alumni list from all time of Bishop Keogh for like $10.
Some nun answers the door in the convent. So my wife, she said, well, I'm an alumni of Seton, and I want to be able to contact a lot of people so we can get together and have a reunion. And I wondered if you had any kind of a book which would have everyone's name and address. And she said, oh, yes, honey, but it'll cost you $10. That's okay. We'll pay you $10.
So they write these anonymous letters that just say, like, did you suffer sexual abuse at Keogh? Or do you know about sexual abuse that happened at Keogh? If so, please reach out to this lawyer.
Right.
What do they do before they send the letters?
They pray over them.
Okay, that's a lot.
That's a lot, but like I love these people.
Yeah,
They're
me too.
doing
Okay,
it's
fine.
Like,
God, I take it back.
Oh, I'm sorry. Don't mess with Jean and her family. I will get Beverly Wallace on your ass so fast. But I just thought they were like so strong. All the kids
Yeah.
were there. It was like they are going to do whatever they can do to help their sister or family member get justice. Finally, they sent out over 1,000 postcards.
Yeah.
They thought they were going to get a few responses. They got between 40 and 50. I was crying.
It was amazing.
And what they realize is that as the postcards are coming back, or the responses come in, it's all the same story.
Right. Everybody that called said, we're talking about Father Maskell.
Father Maskell practiced psychology, according to him.
This has to be about
Father Maskell called me into his office and asked me to sit on his lap.
I have a very extensive amnesia regarding large portions of time.
Couldn't wait to get out of there. He made me extremely tears. It made me feel like I really did have all these problems.
Years I regretted not telling anyone.
It's all coming back, and Beverly's like, perfect.
Yeah.
And the church is like, we don't care. We know we asked you for this. We know you're giving us exactly what we wanted.
Sorry.
Too bad. We're just going to move them around.
So this is what happens. They have this like amazing graphic of a map where they're like, you're seeing where what's his name?
Maskell.
Where like, wait, let's give him a nickname.
That's not the Zodiac Killer.
Right, the Zodiac Killer.
But then we're going to cover the Zodiac Killer, and it's
true.
going to be confusing.
So Zodiac Maskell,
Right.
you see him getting moved all over the place.
Right.
While Jean is like meeting with all the lawyers, like this guy's alive, and she's afraid that like any day she's going to walk into a conference room for a meeting and he's going to be there.
Of course.
Yeah.
It's horrifying.
Because it's a possibility.
Yeah. Before we move on to the big cliffhanger, because this series loves its cliffhangers, and I'm all about them, I really want to talk about how Gemma and Abbie are now researching all of this, and they know everything that happened. But when they were at Keough, they had no idea.
Right, and it's jarring when you see that in the documentary because like you meet so many students that this has happened to that you for a minute kind of forget that Gemma and Abbie are even a part of the story, and then it comes back to them and they're like, we loved high school, everything was amazing, we had no idea, and you're just kind of like, how is that possible? But then Jillian, you explained it to me.
Yeah, I mean, look, a lot of people say, like, Abbie admittedly was like, at first I didn't believe it because she would, like, were they going to the same school even?
Right.
And Gemma and Abbie were just lucky enough to not have any abuse in their history for Zodiac Maskell to prey on them. So when Abbie says that, I just sort of thought, like, as someone who has experience who has been sexually assaulted, not of course anywhere near Jean's story and the women at Keough, but it's people don't realize, like, why didn't you say anything? The way I can explain it is, if you had trouble watching this documentary, if you have trouble talking about episode 2 and explaining it, try living it and then saying the words to somebody. Right. It's really hard. You do work on yourself first, and if you don't want to remember things, if that's how you deal with it, then that's how you deal with it. Mm-hmm. And it's really nobody else's business when you are ready to talk about it in whatever way and to whoever you want. So to me, it's very simple. But when you don't experience it and you haven't lived it, it's hard for people. I can kind of see where they're saying, like, but if this was happening, like, why didn't you? And also, she was just being threatened. And again, these were godlike people.
And she was shown a dead body and was like, if you...
Let's not forget that, everybody. Which is the whole reason we're here.
That's the whole reason we've gathered here today. All right, let's talk about the big cliffhanger at the end.
All right, so here's the deal. Zodiac Maskell, super creep, terrible person. You know how he was like taking all these files, these detailed files?
While he was like molesting and raping these girls.
Right.
Yeah.
What he does is that he buries them in...
There's like a cemetery.
Holy Cross Cemetery. Okay.
So what he does is he like puts them in plastic, preserve them, got to preserve those papers.
It just seems like this would have been the place where you would, if you were going to get rid of something, you would do it back in there.
And he tells the caretaker, like, he's not even smart enough to do it himself. And they talk about, like, what a genius this Maskell guy is. But he's like, hey, cemetery caretaker.
Dig a hole 10 by 20 feet in a back abandoned part of the cemetery.
Put all of these sealed boxes wrapped in plastic that is not suspicious at all, and then reseed it and resurface it with grass. Can you do that?
Also, can you do it in the middle of the night so nobody sees?
Kenya, thanks. So the caretaker's like, sure. And then looks at the body, like, of course. Right. It's like, what exactly am I burying and why?
Well, Mr. Story was pretty street smart, it sounded like. And while Maskell was getting more documents, Mr. Story climbed down into the hole and opened one of the boxes and looked at the documents.
Then he gets fired and then goes to the police.
And in August of 1994, when Jane Doe came forward, Mr. Story went to a detective who is off the record. We've nicknamed him Deep Throat from the old Watergate inside source. Deep Throat says that Mr. Story told him the story and said, I don't know what all's down there, but I know where it's buried.
And the detective on the case, he's the one that they're calling Deep Throat because he is afraid for his life and for his family. So he's never come forward and said, I have this evidence, but he's seen all the evidence and he knows where it is.
And this is not a Jane Doe Jean situation where like there's a big reveal. No, the big reveal is his information.
You guys, we're not going to give you a big sign off. We're just going to say go download episode 2. It's equally as interesting and funny. But before you do, Jillian has one piece of information for you.
Yes, if you need to call the National Sexual Assault Hotline, the number is 1-800-656-4673. It's anonymous. They're available 24 hours a day.
And they'll help you.
They're great.
All right, go download episode 2.
Bye.
Bye.